All right, parents, here we go again. It's the Ask Dr. Tony episode. This is the Experience Miracles podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, an expert in pediatrics, neurodevelopmental disorders, and drug-free, nervous system-focused healthcare. On this weekly episode, I'll be addressing the top questions on every parent's mind. If there's one thing we love and welcome, it's parents who never stop learning, asking the hard questions, and advocating for your kiddos like none other. So get ready for some real talk, real-life clinical and parenting experience, and real easy to understand answers that will help your family take action and get to that next level of health and healing. You ask, I answer. Let's dive into today's episode. This question that came in, can the moon, like full moons and weather changes and seasonal shifts, can that actually influence my kids' behavior? Can it influence seizures? Can it mess with anxiety? Can it trigger PANDAS and PANS and POTS sort of flare-ups? And the answer is unequivocally, absolutely yes. Now, I am so stoked. We've had hundreds, actually, I think it's about thousands of questions come through our DMs on PX Talks on Instagram and Facebook and come through the support inbox that has led us, however long ago we started to do these weekly, live and then up on the podcast, Ask Dr. Tony show episodes. And it's kind of surprising to me that this is the first time this question has come through, because in practice over the last 17 years, I have been asked this question or a very, similar version of it probably hundreds of times and got into this conversation with what we call table talk, which means we have adjusting tables, right, as we're taking care of patients. And for us, we love more than anything else to constantly be empowering and educating in answering our patients' questions. So those conversations, even if they're brief, they're very rich. They're very deep into real life, right? Real life challenges that you guys are going through. And I get asked all the time, hey, it seems like every time there's a full moon, my kiddos' sensory issues, their behavior, their anxiety gets worse. It seems like in the spring and in the fall, kind of as an aggregate of seasonal changes, things get worse. And I'm going to give you all the science here. I'm not just going to answer this one with, yes, that's true. I'm going to give you, number one, like we do on every episode, the neuroscience behind why it's true. And then number two, what to do about it. Okay. So the truth is seasonal changes, the lunar shifts. So when storms come in, it changes. Now, let me just actually real quick give you a little bit of a disclaimer. There's a joke in my family that out of my wife and I, Christina and I love school. I would love to go back and get about 7 more degrees, but by the time I'm done, I'm a little bit of a busy fella with other things, so I'm not allowed to go back to school and get another doctorate or PhD or master's or anything right now. But I love every class. And if it's especially under anything to do with science, I would have loved it. Now, my wife not necessarily didn't love school, right? God made her to be just the GSDer behind the scenes and everything else. So I'm just, as I like to do, sneak in kind of some of these personal stories. I love you, hon. Sorry, I'm sharing this one. But she took this meteorology class, evidently, back in the day at Iowa State. Go Cyclones, soon to be the #1 basketball team in the country. Let's go. And it was a class she evidently loved, and she loved the teacher, and everything was great. And so anyways, there's this meteorology story that sticks in our family. I did not take that class. I am going to talk about things like, I actually just want to look at my notes here to make sure that I can say them right, like lunar calendars, and we're going to talk about barometric pressure shifts. And because I know neuroscience and physics and physiology and neurology really well, I'm going to talk about those weather terms in this one as it relates to neuroscience and your kids' behavior, their mood, their sleep, and those things, and even seizures. But I won't get caught up. So those of you that are meteorologists, okay, those of you that love these terms, when I butcher them, I plead the fifth. Please know that I'm using them for relatability into the sensory seizure world, not necessarily talking about weather on this one. But holy heck, is it a real part of our life where, especially if you live, I know some climates, like if you live in San Diego, the weather's the same all the time. So maybe this conversation is less relevant to you. But for the majority of us, there are seasonal shifts. And the more, if you live in a place like where I live, where the shifts are pretty significant, and there is these different storms and pressure systems and everything that come through, it's a real life thing. That quality of life for kids with sensory behavior, anxiety, seizures, and these neurological conditions, they often get worse during these changes. And so for many years, I've studied this. I've looked at the science behind this, the neurology behind this, and I'm so excited the question came through so I can teach it to you guys, because once you understand the science behind it, you can't do anything about the weather. We can't do anything about, pressure shifts and weather changes and the frickin' lunar calendar, whether it's a full moon or not. But you absolutely can understand it so that you can do something about it to help your child and maybe yourself, your whole family's nervous system, be as regulated, as resilient, and as adaptable. Because, again, the joke would, anytime you're talking about the weather, you have to be like, how accurate is the predictions from the meteorologist? Well, not really, but at least enough to kind of get into this conversation. So I'll leave you with one more story before we get into science. Truth is, I live out on a farm, and we live out in the country. We've cleared a ton. When I come up the lane to my farm, it's this big clearing where our house is, and it's beautiful. You can see the moon and you can see the stars. And often, because we're a family practice, I see patients late. I'll see patients till 7 o'clock at night. So oftentimes it's dark when I'm coming up or we're coming after a sports game. I've always lived this duality of a life when I drive up the lane and I see a full moon. When I see a full moon on the farm, my first natural human instinct is to go, oh, look at that. That is so gorgeous. What a beautiful night. And then because I'm a neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor who knows the conversation I'm about to have with you, I will then go, oh, crap. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day in the practice. Some of our kids are probably going to have a little uptick in their neurosensory neuroseizure challenges because maybe their nervous system is just still in that healing mode where it's still hypersensitive, dysregulated. Because the truth is, these pressure systems, these barometric pressure shifts, these seasonal changes, weather stuff affects all of us. But it's going to affect our kiddos with behavior issues, sensory issues, anxiety, seizures, autism more because their nervous systems are more discombobulated. Their nervous systems are more dysregulated even at rest or kind of as probably the current baseline. So therefore it's more sensitive. So again, to recap the first kind of one-on-one answer here to this question that came in through the platform, yes, they very much can significantly impact and alter a child's behavior, especially in the neurosensory world with sleep, mood, and seizures and so forth. So let's break down and get a little bit more detailed into it. What about the moon? So one of the questions came in specifically about the moon, and then right around it, another question about weather changes and those things. So what happens with the lunar cycle is there's changes in gravitational pull. Now, I'll try and not get too nerdy. This is me, and we do get nerdy on this podcast, so I'm going to get into it, but I'll try. I promise I won't lose you. I'll come back to the Iowa farmer interpretation of this. With changes in gravitational pull, it really alters the function and changes how much your child's sensory motor or neurosensory system, how much work that system needs to do. Now, what I've done is I've done a bunch of episodes on here that talk about how essential neuromotor, specifically what's called the sensory motor system, that is a foundational first developmental window that must be developed on track effectively and fully for kids. When kids have physical birth trauma, forceps, vacuum, upper cervical subluxation, vagus nerve insufficiency, all the things we talk about, the number one system, I know you're told that your kiddo with behavior issues and autism and seizures, I know you're told that the gut is the number one system that is dysregulated and the gut connects to the brain. And if you heal the gut, you'll help heal their brain. I know in today's kind of conversation on Instagram, Facebook, and biomedical, specialists and offices and seminars and conferences, it's all about the gut. But the gut is actually not the most important subsystem of the body. Net, the nervous system is the most important system of the body, plain and simple. But the nervous system then governs, regulates, and modulates these other subsystems. The motor system, the sensory motor system, when it comes to brain function, so brain is where behavior and emotions and seizures, when the brain is dysregulated, those things are going to come out of it. So what would piss off the brain, to be very, very frank? Yes, changes in diet and gut issues and inflammation do that. That's why families see such changes when they heal the diet, change their diet and heal their gut. But the sensory motor system is the system that deals with gravity. The sensory motor system is gross motor, so big muscles, getting your kiddo to stand upright, crawl, it's gross motor development, and it's the most essential thing to the foundation. I know I wish I could show the visual, the triangle we created that shows nervous system development first, sensory motor second, gut immune third, okay? So when we get into this lunar, moon, seasonal, barometric weather conversation, the system it messes with the first most is our gravitational sensory motor system. Seizures are a motor issue. And believe it or not, behavior, anxiety is a motor issue. Ever notice how physically tense your child is when they're in a meltdown or when they're in anxiety? Ever notice that when you, as a mom or a dad, have physical tension in what's called your suboccipital, so your upper cervical, kind of behind your ears and the base of your skull, in your neck, in your traps, in your shoulders, in between your shoulder blades, around the bra strap, that area, we kind of call that the mom stress zone. Have you ever noticed when you are physically having tension, pain, headaches, how's your behavior? How's your mood? How's your anxiety? How's your focus and your concentration and your sleep? And so what happens with these weather changes, as old wives' tale as this sounds, is it actually makes our sensory motor systems work harder. It throws them off their regular track because of this gravitational pull, changes in pressure, and it affects the biological rhythms and the circadian rhythms of the body. But it also very much affects the sensory motor system. Where subluxation, which is what we talk about and what neurologically focused pediatric chiropractors are the only ones on earth to find and take care of, subluxation first wreaks havoc on the sensory motor system. And specifically, the neurospinal system is responsible for this. So the neck and the spine are responsible for 60%. So almost 2/3 of the sensory motor input into the brain comes from those areas. And so when a full moon and a weather shift and a seasonal shift comes, it actually causes our bodies physically, neuromotor, sensory motor wise, it causes them to tense up. Again, running out the old wives' tale conversation with this. When I grew up, I kid you not, my dad, farmer, real farmer. Like you Google farmer and you see somebody with tough leather skin and a handshake that could literally break all the bones in your hand and he's not even trying. Like that's how tough, that's how awesome my dad is. All right. And weather is essential to farming. Again, you can't control it, but you need to know when it's coming. Have you ever heard from grandparents or people or farmers, oh, there's a storm coming. I can feel it in my bones. There's a storm coming. I can feel it in my hips, right? That is a conversation that you probably heard before in your life. And you're like, that's stupid. That sounds crazy. That's, conspiracy theory, right? Well, evidently we can talk about that stuff on, hey, Zach, did you see the video yesterday? Come on, we're back. All right. Anyways, that's just funny and true. So the conversation is real. And it's actually got neuroscience. I would almost kind of call it neurophysics because I love neurology and I love physics the most. And that's the conversation here. So behavior issues, anxiety, autism, seizures, they are actually first locked into the neuromotor system. That is why seizures and motor tics and these things like PANDAS comes with tics and those things a lot. That's why it presents itself in the motor system, right? And the muscles have the expression outwardly of the seizure. And so these lunar cycle changes, full moons, barometric pressure and weather shifts, storms coming in, and then on a larger scale, our practice is always the busiest during spring and during fall. Yes, that is a busy time for school. There's more pressure with grades and classes and homework. Yes, school is the same thing as social. So there's more, that's where all the social pressures and those challenges come for our kids. Yes, there tends to be a lot of sports and extra stretched busy schedules during that time and tests and finals. But I'll tell you this, one of the busiest reasons that a perfect storm, neurologically focused family practice is busiest during those seasonal transitions is this conversation right here. There is real, hardcore, it's complicated and simple at the same time, neuroscience behind full moons, weather shifts, seasonal changes, and it has to do with gravitational pull. It has to do with the vagus nerve. I haven't talked about the vagus yet. Let me get a little bit deeper into that. The vagus nerve is the number one thing that regulates our parasympathetic system, which is the calming system, the regulation system. So when the vagus nerve is really strong and resilient and functional, we're not going to run into behavior challenges, meltdowns, anxiety, seizures. The vagus nerve, keeping that thing bussin', which is a teen term for fully active and rocking, keeping that thing going full speed is essential to holding off all these different challenges with behavior, anxiety, and seizures. In kiddos who are already subluxated, not only is the front end of what we just talked about, they're already stuck with this neurosensory physical tension, just literally loaded onto their neck, their upper cervical, where the vagus nerve comes from. The traps in their neurospinal system is already extra hyper sympathetic sensitive, right? So they have a shorter trigger to behavior issues to begin with because of this heightened sympathetic arousal. Subluxation does that. Subluxation of the upper cervical and the upper third to half of the neurospinal system, because the vagus nerve branches from the brainstem and comes all the way down into the thorax and digestive as well. So whenever there's subluxation that is getting in the way of vagus nerve function, you have two problems in one. You have the heightened sympathetic response, which is going to leave us more easily triggered by everything in life, including full moons and barometric pressure and seasonal shifts. And then you have vagus nerve suppression or vagus nerve instability, which is called dysregulation. And the other catch-all term for this is called dysautonomia. So the real neuroscience behind autism, behind epilepsy, behind ADHD, behind anxiety is those D terms: nervous system dysfunction, dysregulation, and dysautonomia. Subluxation, the thing that only chiropractors of this kind, neurologically focused chiropractors, know about to find and take care of, subluxation triggers that cascade of neurological dysfunction, dysregulation, and dysautonomia. So if kiddos are still in that subluxated state, if they haven't had a full complement and full care, and again, it takes time to get all the way through this and heal the body and repair the nervous system from subluxation, dysfunction, dysregulation, and dysautonomia, then they're going to be extra sensitive to full moons. They're going to be extra sensitive to colder temperatures, warmer temperatures, and most importantly, what we're really talking about here is the day or two that'll be most troublesome is the big shift days, when the pressure really shifts and the storm comes in, when the temperature really swings. And this is in life in the Midwest for us, especially the upper Midwest, this is freaking normal. We can go literally 30, 50, sometimes 70 degree shifts in a matter of a day or two. And that's just nuts, but that's also just real life. And so if our kiddos have these challenges, that's what we're talking about. So that is the section of this one that says, okay, this is a real issue. And yes, Mom, you're asking the question because you've observed it. And your observation, even though you may be kind of like, oh, is this just an old wives' tale? Is this just something I'm kind of cooking up in my head? There's neuroscience behind it. And that's the neuroscience, at least kind of a first run through it. I could go on for hours about this stuff, but that's the first run and deep dive into the science. So that takes us to this part of every episode, right? And call me out on it if I never do a good job of getting to this section, please, because we're here to not just say, oh, here's all the science and here's all the terms, here's all the not good stuff that's happening. We're here for this section, which is to say, what do you do about it? When those subluxations are present, the brain-body connection, vagus nerve function, and nervous system regulation is already really compromised, which makes the nervous system, here's the catch-all conversation, it makes the nervous system less adaptable, less resilient, and the way I like to teach it to my patients is there's less slack in the rope. And you can almost even, I want you to just picture this physically. And sometimes just think of yourself, maybe you're in a really high state. You, your family are going through the perfect storm still right now, right? And you yourself, Mom and Dad, you're in a state of heightened anxiety. You're physically feeling that tension on your neck and your shoulders and your nervous system all the time. By the way, the next live I'm going to do is, can this care benefit adults too? I think you know my answer, but I'll break down the science there too. So when you're physically wound up and you're just tense, just think of it like tension on a rubber band or tension on a rope, right? Like there's just not a lot of slack in that rubber band and not a lot of slack in that rope. Guys, the neuromotor, neuromuscular, neurotonal system of the body works like that. And the brain is more acutely tapped into that system than the gut, inflammation, neurotransmitters, you name it. The brain spends 90% of its energy just dealing with gravity. 90%. So when gravitational pull is altered, that's a big deal. So what we do is we make adjustments. Now, in our world, there's kind of this catch-all word of neurotonal adjustments, but I want to give you some of the details, probably even a little more than I normally do on the podcast, and break it down as into this conversation. In a neurotonal chiropractic office, so a PX doc's office, right? There is a multitude of different chiropractic techniques, and some of them are designed to release. So what's a little bit more known as these tonal. And these are very light force, subtle touch, crazy gentle adjustments. These adjustments done in this manner and then in specific locations or regions of the nervous system and neurospinal system, they are designed to release that stuck tension on that spinal cord, neurospinal system, which again, in today's analogy is that rubber band, that rope is so neurophysically, neurosensory wound up. We first have to make adjustments for these kiddos and these patients that release that stuck tension. Now, I want to sneak this in here too. It's not the episode of today, but it could be the episode every single time. What about the neurodetox? What about when your kiddo is wound up, has seizures, has autism, has stimming, has sensory issues? Sometimes they've been so used to having all of this tension wound up on that cord that when we go to release it, they don't quite know how to handle it. It can sometimes turn nervous system regulation a bit upside down. It's called the neurodetox in order to get it right side up. Now, we would do anything if we could to skip this. It's usually just a couple of days. Some cases, the neurodetox can last for 2 to 3 weeks, but that's the max for the vast majority of these cases. And it has to do with this neuroscience. It has to do with what we're talking here. So some of the neurotonal adjustments have to release that stuck tension. But remember, every time we talk about subluxation, dysfunction, dysregulation, and dysautonomia, it's a two-sided coin problem. You have too much sympathetic stuck tension, so that needs to be released, and a certain adjustment technique or techniques do that. But then you have exhaustion. You have vagus nerve shutdown. You have vagus nerve exhaustion and suppression. So other adjustments need to have a little bit of more what's called amplitude to them. And then those adjustments are stimulatory to the vagus nerve. What we tend to find with our kiddos who are most sensitive to the full moons, most sensitive to weather changes, barometric pressure, storms, seasonal shifts, and so forth. So the question of today that we're answering, they're the kiddos that are still quite wound up, sympathetic dominant, and quite vagus nerve insufficient. Once we start to address these issues with a full neurologically focused care plan, over time, and we track this with the insight scans. It's the one bummer about the Experience Miracles podcast is I can't visibly show you the insight scans. But if you want to see something that literally brings all of the conversation, all the neuroscience, and the life transformation that this kind of chiropractic care can give your kiddos and your family, if you want to see them, go to the website and check out the article about the insight scans, because we can visually and numerically, with this technology, we can actually track these changes and improvements. And so when a child is still in the early stages and they're still quite dysautonomic and dysregulated, we will be very vocal with our patients and say, hey, there's a big storm, there's a seasonal shift. We're doing our best with our patients. And guys, I want to get way better at it. And so even PX Docs, you guys listen, practitioners listening to this, and parents, you can be proactive with us. I'd love to actually pre-schedule appointments ahead of the storms. And in this case, I literally actually mean storms, because sometimes we know we have a kiddo whose nervous system is just still in a state of sensitivity, right? It's still dysregulated. It's still discombobulated. So we know that the full moon or the weather change is more likely to cause issues for them. So here's what we do. Extra adjustments. It's not a super, rocket sciencey sort of solution here, but we just increase care. So all of our seizure patients, our PANDAS patients, they are the real lead, and our autism spectrum patients who are still earlier in care and we haven't got through these stages of healing and recovery maybe just yet. These are the patients who, when this stuff shows up, will do what's called a boost adjustment or two. So they may be on a certain frequency, which is kind of our dosage of care, and we'll do extra. We'll adjust them twice that day to help regulate their dysregulated system that is going to be further dysregulated by the lunar shifts, by those things. Because what does it do also? And I didn't even cover this, but I can just put it in at the end here. These things also mess with our sleep challenges. So circadian rhythm has a lot to do with falling asleep and staying asleep. Sleep is the number one challenge. Again, you talk about the gut, yes, but bigger issues than the gut in the world of autism, seizures, anxiety, and the kiddos that I get to take care of, we got to get their motor system, their sensory system, and their sleep online. We get those in a better place. Yes, we're always working on the gut and the immune system and inflammation, but I've had so many families who have been told that the way they heal their child's brain is all about the gut and all about inflammation. And that is all right. That is all correct. It's just incomplete. You have to take care of subluxation and the sensory motor system. You have to take care of the vagus nerve. You have to take care of sleep, and you have to take care of that system as well. And so when these changes come in, it can throw off sleep and can throw the timing of those things off even more. And that's going to obviously increase the instability in the nervous system for your child, which will make their behavior, their emotions, or their seizures. So it's kind of its own. That's what I'll say in closing. And then I'll make sure and see if there's any questions on this live. What these full moons are, what these storms and seasonal shifts are, is they're little mini perfect storms within the perfect storm. All right. So we have to address them as such. So my favorite way to be with our patients always is what I love to call being proactive. I think one of the worst things about the medical system is it's entirely reactive. We don't do anything about our health until we've lost it, right? That's how the system is, right? And then what do you do about it after you lost it? Supposedly just suppress symptoms with medication. Now, you're all here because you want a different approach. You want a proactive approach. You want a drug-free approach. You want a holistic nervous system focused approach. Sometimes, even in our world, you guys, and I want you to hear this at the end of this one, sometimes even in our world, we have to be reactive. I am with my kiddos. I want you to know that. My kiddos have been on a regular wellness lifestyle from the jump. My kids have been under wellness, proactive, preventative. I love the word proactive a lot more than prevention, because medicine is also kind of taken the term prevention and sells us stuff, that makes us sick as a result of it. And so anyways, we love this proactive approach. It's our philosophy. It's our paradigm. But you know what? Sometimes stuff happens. Our kids get sick. Our kids get injured. Our kids have challenges. And sometimes there's a storm. And sometimes there's challenges. And so what I am, sometimes, even though I just taught you this whole thing for a half hour, sometimes I'll pull up on the farm, see the full moon, and look at my daughters and go, no wonder you're being a little extra saucy and spicy today. Anybody have daughters? And just know that their baseline is spicy and stubborn and sweet and loving and all the things, but the first two too, okay? And then there's a full moon or there's a weather shift, and I'll be like, well, that explains it. No wonder she's been being a little bit of a bear to me. And I'll make a reactive, if you will, adjustment to help her nervous system regulate. So I want a lot of you to know that are already under care or you're under wellness care. Okay, hopefully your chiropractor is not using the word maintenance. I think that is just a word that we need to get rid of. Nobody wants to maintain their health. We want to improve it, right? At all times. We want to experience more health, more life with our kids and family, more healing. And so we use more of those terms. But around these full moons, these weather shifts, and these seasonal changes and storms, you might need some extra adjustments. That's just real life based upon real neuroscience. No, it's not just our farmer dads going, it's going to rain tonight. I can feel it. I distinctly remember these conversations with my dad and being like, what a whack job. What, he can't feel it in his bones? What is he, a magician or a wizard of meteorology? Like, come on, Steve. Of course I didn't call him Steve. Come on, Dad, that's not true. And then I become a neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor specializing in seizures and autism. And every time there's a full moon or weather changes, things get worse. So I had to figure it out and be like, what the hell's going on here? And study the science. And it's true and it's real. And I'll write this up. Actually, it won't be up there today if you're on live with us. Maybe by the time the podcast episode comes out. Every time I create one of these outlines, so I don't just go on here. When the questions come in, just so you know, you're always going to get like in-depth, full throttle answers from me. I don't just take a question in from the platform. some of them I could to a degree. I have enough experience and understanding. I could probably just go live and talk about it. But I really want to do a good job for you guys and your family. So I always spend about an hour or two going through and preparing a notes and outline. If you ever jump on live and you see my eyes kind of duck down to the screen, that's because I want to make sure I'm covering everything in the notes and making sure I'm teaching you the stuff that you and your family deserve and need to know to get out of the storm and get to the other side of it. And so when I first got into this work, I had to think back to those things with, my dad and others and thinking like, gosh, is that really parents? Because I don't want to say I was skeptical of parents telling me like, oh, their child's behavior is worse or their seizures got worse when there's a full moon. But even me, neurological, I know people think, oh, I'm skeptical of chiropractic. You know what? I think I've always been a good communicator of chiropractic. I'm skeptical of everything in my whole freaking life, right? Because I love to learn the neuroscience behind it. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Do you have a question that you would like to submit? Either send it to support@pxdocs.com with the subject Ask Dr. Tony, or head on over to our socials @pxdocs, where you can submit your question in our stories every single week. Every kid counts and every family counts, so let's leave no questions left unanswered. If you loved this episode and you want to help us reach more kids, we would so appreciate if you left a review and a rating on your favorite platform. God bless. Be well. We'll see you on the next one.